this church forever, and I'm a husband, I'm a father, I'm a business owner, I'm not a preacher. So what I like to do is share the journey that God is taking me through in my life. I have a extreme love with God, and I want to make sure that I can share that with others. So I'm not a scholar, I'm not a theologian. I am a person that's just telling you what God's taking me through. So if I'm wrong on something, just take it as that. I'm not trying to be biblically scholar here. So I want to take you through something that God's been working on through me, and it's called Let the Past Be the Past. Today is actually my wife and I's 13th anniversary, so we're excited about that. So, and a lot of this that we're going to go through today actually ties into my anniversary and why it means a lot to me. I didn't know any of this stuff, and I lived in a life that I wasn't very happy for a very long time, and a lot of that, bled into my marriage and caused a lot of problems. And we almost didn't make it to 13 years. And I'm sure a lot of you that have been married past that point or close to that point, you had some rough patches too. And thankfully, God got a hold of my heart in a big way and started changing a lot of things. And we were able to be happily married now, more happily than I've ever been in my entire life. And a lot of it is because of these principles, these things that we're going to talk about today, are things that God really started to get a hold of me. And I'm still in this journey even as we speak. What was interesting last week when I was talking, I said something, and I realized that was an epiphany I had, but never really realized I had it. Like, I just said it because I believed it, but I never really said it before. And so that's what kind of trickled into what we're going to talk about today. And so let the past be the past, and we're going to talk a lot about this. So the problems that I'm going to state in these were my problems. You may not relate to it, but I hope you do. And however you can fit yourself, do that, please. So my problem number one was the past and future were defining who I was today. And the possibility that I'm kind of moving into is God's grace defines who I am today. And so in Ephesians 2:8 it says, "For you are saved by grace through faith, and this is not from yourselves. It is a gift from God." And as we go through this journey, we're going to sit and we're going to talk about the grace of God and what that means to us, and then we're going to talk about ourselves, and then we're going to talk about how this relates to others. And this journey that God's taking me on is a lot of the struggle that I had in the past. Was I always lived in the past of my wrongdoings, things I did, what I shouldn't have done, and I let that define me today. And I wouldn't let God give me grace because I didn't feel like I deserved it. And then I was also obsessed with future. And I constantly kept clinging to that because I didn't like who I was now. So it was easier to think about who I could be in the future because I didn't like who I was at the moment, because I was letting the past define who I was right then. And what's interesting is God's grace kind of cleans all that away. It takes this moment in life, and for me it was, what if you just sat in the moment and you just accepted God's grace? Your past didn't matter, the future doesn't matter, just in that exact moment, and you just were. And that's where God's been teaching me some things, is just stopping and just being present in that grace, because you can't change the past. You sure can't predict the future, at least I can't. God already knows what's going to happen, so he doesn't really care about that. He cares about you right then, and he wants your attention right in that moment of just being okay with who you are right in that very moment. And I'm still working on getting this, but it's been a very transformational journey. As whenever I'm sitting down and I'm praying and I'm reading scripture and I'm studying, that God actually sits with me in that moment, and is present in that moment. And the past doesn't matter at that time, the present doesn't matter at that time, just being in that moment is what matters. And it's interesting, as you kind of start to see this and accept it, that you start to give yourself a little bit of that grace that God gives you. You start to accept this gift that God gives you. And it's a very interesting transition. So in 1 Corinthians 15:10 it says, "But by God's grace I am where I am, and His grace toward me was not ineffective. However, I worked more than any of them, yet not I, but God's grace that was with me." And I'm a worker. I just kind of go, I work hard, I work a lot. And so this really resonated with me. It's like, well, I work a lot harder than any of them, but that doesn't matter. God's grace is, I am what I am. His grace toward me is not ineffective. His grace towards you, if you accept it, is 100% effective. 100% effective. Think about that. What in your life is ever 100% effective? God created this gift of sending His Son to die on the cross for us, this gift of grace. And to me, it's the most ultimate gift that there is, because it's kind of the stepping stone. It's the beginning portion of allowing us to live a life that's truly free, a life that we can truly receive love from God, and a life that we can give love to others. And without accepting that grace, in my mind at least, I was never enough. I never knew how to accept it. And it was a very interesting journey. So problem 2 is going to be similar to problem 1, but it's going to we're going to assume that we're accepting this grace now. And the next problem is you love the wrong version of yourself. The past defines your present, and you define yourself by, let me go back to that. You define yourself by who you are not. And so I'm going to dig into that a little bit more after we go through this. So your love, and the possibility is you love yourself as God sees you today. So I spent a tremendous amount of my time not loving myself. And this is a journey that really, it was November 2018 that I really it clicked for me, that I started to go, there is something wrong up here and in here. First I started with accepting God's grace, but then I went, I just don't like myself. Like, I couldn't forgive myself from the past, but all I ever did was beat myself up for this future version of me that I wanted but wasn't achieving. It was the amount of money I wanted in my bank account that was never there. It was the friends that I always wanted but never had. It was always these things that were here that I wanted, and I will love myself and I will give myself permission to be happy once I achieve those things. And I just lived in that all the time. So I never really liked myself, because I always had this, okay, well, in 90 days, I'm going to be this, and if I'm not that, then, well, I'm just not doing a good job. And so it goes back to then the same tug of the past. I still wasn't really forgiving myself of the past. I started to accept God's grace, but for me it was I clinged to the past, I obsessed about the future, and I neglected the now. And that was a really big problem for me, was I just never lived in the now. I was obsessed with the future. And you can ask my wife or anybody that knows me, I love business because I love that I can create, and I'm always obsessed with the future. But I always let the past be an anchor, and I just always forgot about this very moment. And so I was missing it with my kids. I was missing it with my wife. I was missing it just on so many different levels. I was just missing it. And it was because I thought that's who I should be. I just thought that I can love myself, others will love me more if I achieved these things. And that was not the case. What I found was that if I started to love myself now, and I started to give that love to others, that it became more and more powerful. And in Psalms 36:7 it says, "God, your faithful love is so valuable that people take refuge in the shadow of your wings." That if you love yourself as God sees you today, you take refuge in that. That He's protecting you. That He doesn't matter what you did. It doesn't really matter what you're going to do. That God loves you in this very, very moment. And you can love yourself in this moment because of that. And I listened to someone say this the other day, or not the other day, a few months ago. And I'm still trying to wrap my mind around it, so don't take this as truth. I'm personally going through this process of exploring this, but they told me something that really started to make me think. They said that your soul, you got your body, you got your mind, you can mess those up pretty good. You can eat unhealthy, you can screw up your mind by thinking bad things. They said, but there's one thing in life you can't screw up, and that's your soul. He said, you just can't screw up your soul. He said, it's just there. God created it, and you can't screw it up. Now, you cannot believe in this, and he said everyone believes different things, so it's not a Christian thing that he was talking about, but he just said this thing that you can't screw up your soul. And it hit me just thinking about this, like, well, if I, okay, then that means God just loves me, and no matter what condition I am, because he created this soul that is going to go be with him one day, and I can't screw that up. Like, I screw up a lot. I screw up a tremendous amount of things every day. But if there's one thing in my life that I just kind of can rest on, that my soul can't be broken. And again, that's not something that I found in Scripture. It's just something that really made me think about this, and that I was loving the wrong version of myself. And the second thing is that God is love. And this will transition into where a lot of this is going to take place, and is love your neighbor as yourself. There is no other greater command than these. And what I found was interesting as I went through this journey is God says to love your neighbor as yourself. But what's interesting with that, and I think the dynamic of a lot of us today, is we don't know how to love ourselves. So how in the world can we love our neighbor properly? You know, if we can't accept God's grace for us, then how are we going to ever properly extend grace to others? If we can't love and be proud of our own accomplishments, then how are we ever going to love and be proud of the accomplishments of others? If you don't see, it just started to click for me. Is that I would say I'm proud of this person, or I would say I extended grace, but I truly wasn't. It was a story I was telling myself to make myself feel better. But until I truly started to understand God's grace and accept that grace, and then I truly started to begin the journey of loving myself, well, then that's when things started to really change in my life. And that's when things really started to even change in my marriage. And so problem number 3 was, I love the wrong version. You love the wrong versions of others. You love the past version of others, and you love others for what you believe they should be. This is where I lived for most of my life. I've done it to my family, I've done it to my wife, I've done it to my kids, even though they're young, I've done it to my employees. I would literally Tiffany could probably tell you so many times, I'm so mad because this person just doesn't get it, like they can't see their potential, and I would just live in this all the time, and I would do it, and I just put these things onto other people. What was interesting was they were my stories. They were what I wanted for other people. They weren't necessarily what other people wanted for themselves. They were just things that I placed on them, and things that I thought I saw. And I've seen it happen both directions. A friend of mine who just recently got divorced because he loved the past version of his wife. He couldn't accept the current version of her. And he saw no future. And then I'm more guilty in falling in love with the future version of what I see of people. And it's the story that I created. And that honestly is what really started to be the deterioration of my marriage and of relationships around me. I always say I don't have friends, I can't connect with anybody. Well, because I'm a jerk who always wants more for someone else, and instead of loving them for where they are now, I get frustrated with them and they don't like them. Because I just think, well, they could be so much more, but they're not, so it's not worth my time. Instead of just being genuine and seeing them for who they were right then. And that's how I lived my marriage. That's honestly what almost led to the demise of my marriage, was that one big thing. Was I was harder on her than, because I was hard on myself because I couldn't accept God's grace. And then all this started to trickle in. And I noticed I was even guilty of it with my employees. I would either maybe terminate them because well, you're never going to hit the objectives I think you're going to hit. Maybe I was just too hard on them. Maybe I didn't have the right conversations with them, and they just needed me to be okay with where they were right then so that they had permission to be okay to move forward. But instead I was always just, well, you need to be here, you need to be here, you need to be here, you need to be here. And I would just live in frustration all the time. And when you love others exactly where they are and who they are today, there's a very powerful switch that's turned on inside of their life. Because I know I've seen it around me. And this is very new, this is a month of journey that I've seen with this, starting to just genuinely love those around them. And I've watched it transform my relationship with my wife, my relationship with my kids, but even also my relationship with my employees. Is starting to genuinely love them where they are in that moment, without expectations. Now, that doesn't mean that you don't dream, my wife and I dream all the time. We sit down and have big visions, we have big goals. But we also realize that's a version of us that doesn't exist yet. So I can't love that version. I have to love this one that's right in front of me. And as I started to even do this for my employees, what was interesting was their productivity started to go up. Their engagement level went through the roof. They were solving problems faster and better. They were actually giving love back to me and to others, because it wasn't about me going, your 90-day target is right here, you're right here, you're behind, you need to step it up. It was being genuine, going, okay, here's where we're supposed to go. I understand things happen. Let's sit down and talk about this, because in this moment, I can't solve this and I can't solve this, but I can solve this. So let's sit down together and let's work on this together. And what was interesting is all those things changed. But you have to start with yourself. You have to start with yourself and God, then moving into loving yourself, then moving it into others, and then starting that inside of your home first. Something again, even with your children, I'm very, very guilty of, is with Eli especially, is wanting to direct him into what I want. My son is an amazing little boy. He is nothing like me in a lot of ways. I am very, very go, drive. He literally doesn't, I don't know that he has a competitive bone in his body. So soccer is more or less chasing butterflies and running around in circles. Basketball is more or less just running up and down the court and standing there with your hands in the air, wondering what the world's going on. And I find myself going, he needs to be competitive. He needs drive. Like, I need to work with him. I gotta push him. I gotta push this. I gotta push that. But at the same time, you sit him in front of a nature show, or you put him outside, or you put him in a game that he's got the name of Butterfly I've never heard of in my entire life. He's spot on, and he will win. And it's like, okay, what does this mean? Because that doesn't relate to me, and I could easily force my son to play. I could easily force him to do this. And now I'm letting him try everything he wants. But at the same time, it's like, just let them be them. And love them exactly where they are and who they are.
Amen.
Is the most powerful thing you can do for your children. Because I've seen it growing up. I have so many kids who are disconnected from their parents because they just drove them into sports. Like, you're going to get a scholarship, you're going to do this. And by the end, they hated the sport and they hated their parents. And it's not just that. It can be anything in life. Grades in school. I'm literally one I could care less. I hated school. I love to learn, but I didn't like school. Tiffany was one that I don't think she ever got anything under like a 95 in her entire life through college. C's were great for me. So it was interesting, though, as I'm going through this journey, that as I started to do this for other people, they started to reciprocate. I started getting messages. I started getting, it wasn't just like, from your wife, I love you because you're leaving, or I love you because you're home. The things started to change, and like, I genuinely love you too where you are. And when you give people permission and you start to hand that gift to other people, the natural thing is to reciprocate it back. That's just kind of at least how I see human nature working. And so I've been spending a lot of time in this verse, these verses, and I know we hear them a lot with church and all these things, but this is some of the most powerful scripture to me in the Bible. It's just what love is. Love is patient. Love is kind. Love does not envy. It is not boastful. It is not conceited. It does not act improperly. It is not selfish. It is not provoked. It does not keep a record of wrongs. Love finds no joy in unrighteousness, but rejoices in the truth. It bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. And these verses right here are what started to the pivot for me in my relationship with my wife. And I read these a lot as we were going through troubled times and different things, and because I wanted to believe them. I mean, I grew up hearing them my entire life. I've been in this church since I was 5. So I mean, I wanted to believe them. I wanted to know them, but I didn't want to know them because they're on paper. I wanted to live them. I wanted them in my heart. I wanted them in my soul because I wanted to be able to give that back. I wanted to truly be able to love as God loves. And a little bit of a backstory on me. I grew up in the church. I grew up in a very Southern Baptist Christian home. All of you know my father and my mother. And they were amazing. I have no complaints about my parents whatsoever. Very, very blessed. They showed me a lot of amazing examples. But growing up, I started to, I guess as a lot of us do, rebel against Christianity, rebel against religion, rebel against, just, that's not for me, it's not really relevant. But there was something that was really missing was I just missed, like going back to the beginning of that, the grace. I just missed it. And so, as time went along, I grew further and further and further away from understanding all these things. I actually went into not a fantastic place. And I really started to believe that God was this God that was just out there, that honestly, I believed in Jesus, I believed he came and died, but God was just there. He didn't interact with us, he wasn't talking to us, he just was there. And now he died, he got to go to heaven, and he was waiting, I guess, for something to send back and have revelation happen. And I went into this dark place, and I noticed it trickled into everything. It trickled into my business. It trickled into my relationship with my wife. And then it took over. The trickling kind of stopped. And it took over. And I even remember sitting and having conversations with a dear friend of mine that was like, God has zero involvement in this life. I said, yeah, I believe in him, I believe he exists, I believe, but there's just, to me, he's just there. But it wasn't God that stopped trying, it was me. It was me and my false beliefs, because I started to truly believe I could save myself. I started to believe that it was the only way to get ahead was by me working harder, was by me being smarter, was by me. And I believed this intently. And as it trickled in, so did arrogance, so did pride, so did a lot of other things that weren't healthy in my life. And God has this very interesting way of giving you a reality check. And I literally thought for about 2 years of my life I was Job, because I hated life. He started taking things and smacking me in the face left and right. It was in my business, it was in my marriage, it was in my friendships. About 2 years of my life, I almost lost everything. I mean, everything. I had no friends. If they worked for me, they were fired. And I was losing my marriage, I was losing my business, and I was losing everything. And it was all because I just believed inside of my heart that I could do it. That it was me. I could do this. And you can't. To be honest. And I don't know what it takes sometimes for certain people to wake up. For me, it was pretty significant. What's interesting is God's grace was there first. He didn't care about my past. He didn't care about the wrongdoings I had, even though I hung on to them. He didn't care. He cared about loving me exactly as I was right there in that moment. I realized I was a broken individual that needed that grace and that love. And it genuinely changed, and it saved my marriage, and it saved things that saved my business. And I am so grateful for those hard lessons and for where they are now, because I wouldn't be celebrating 13 years of marriage today. wouldn't have my little girl, who's 19 months old. I wouldn't have those things and be grateful for those things if it wasn't for the grace of God. It wasn't Jeremiah. Jeremiah didn't come in and save the day. It was literally the grace of God. And once you finally start to genuinely accept that, then you can start to forgive yourself and to love yourself. And then the next most powerful evolution comes around, and you can start to forgive others and love others for exactly where they are, because you've gone through this evolution of life. And it's a constantly evolving thing. I'm learning every single day about this. But it is powerful, and I want to give you something that you may like it, you may hate it, who knows. It's something I went through, and it's called an action plan. It's called the coffin exercise. I went through this, I looked at the picture, it was, wow, they turned. Interesting. That wasn't like that, my PowerPoint slide, but this is a picture of me and my family going through this, I believe it was last August. And so basically what you do is you get a box. Any box. It can be a Nike shoe box, it can be a sketch, I don't care, it's a box that you can put things in to bury. And what I did was, this was the first evolution of me starting to forgive myself and to give myself permission to become the new version of me, like we talked about today. And so I put things in there. Actually, I wrote letters to myself, forgiving myself, going, this is the things you did in the past. They don't define who you are today. These are the addictions. These are the just anything in my life that I felt like was holding me back. The stories. A lot of it was just written stories that I wrote into and put into this box. And then I sealed it. I dug a hole, and you can't see it because the picture's all messed up now, but I actually dug a hole and buried it. And said, that version of me no longer exists. Those stories that defined me no longer define me. I'm making new ones today. Today's a fresh start. The things that I used to do, the bad influence I used to have, all these different things are now buried and gone. And what it really reminded me of, this wasn't a Christian exercise, what it really reminded me of was being baptized again. That as you are submersed and you come back with a new life, that this was a way of me burying that old life, that old version of me that I didn't want to control me. Now is it magical and all of a sudden you're fixed and cured and everything? No. But what you've done is you've actually done a symbolic thing that gives yourself permission to move forward. And there's a lot of power in that. And I actually took the box and I prayed over it. Spent time praying over it. At first I thought the exercise was stupid. But as I really got into it, I started to pray. It was like, God, if I hold on to these things any longer and I let them define who I am, then I'm never going to be the better version of me that I know can exist. I'm not going to be the version of me that can love myself and that can love others. I'm not going to be any better than I am today because I can't get rid of these old stories. Can't get rid of these things that happened to me as a kid, or that happened, that I've done to other people, or that other people have hurt me as an adult, or business partner relationships that went bad, or whatever it was. I just couldn't get past them. And this gave me a symbolic time. It's just like a symbolic time whenever you go through being baptized. It's a symbolism. It's a place in life that you can put your foot down and go, today is the day that I'm not going to let those things define me anymore. And get your family involved. Share with them, because there's a lot of power in that. There's a tremendous amount of power in sitting there with your family going, look, here's, and if you have stuff from your past you don't want to share with them, that's fine. You don't have to go into details, but just have this symbolism going, here's who I once was, and today I want to make a stand, I want to be different. And then we literally buried it. We buried the box. My son obviously loved digging the hole, because he would think it was 5 at the time, so he enjoyed it, and he had no idea what was going on, but I don't know, my wife really even knew what was going on at the time. She just kind of, okay, I'll go with the process. But it was a very defining moment in my life, because I genuinely gave myself permission to accept God's grace to finally start the process of loving myself. It wasn't a switch, it wasn't an overnight thing, it was just the beginning of the process to give myself permission to move to this next level, which then allows you then to move to the ultimate level, which is then giving to others, taking that power that God gives you and the power you have within inside yourself to give to other people. Because we are in a massively broken world. And there's a lot of love that needs to be given. A lot. And I don't know. All I can tell you is from the testimony of what's happening in my life is it's changing people around me. And I definitely want that for you. I'm going to go ahead and pray and we'll be done. God, thank you so much for all the ways that you love us. God, thank you for your grace. I pray that you would, if nothing else, that everyone here would just think about that word. Think about what your son went through so that we can have that grace. It's not something that can be earned. It is a gift that is given with no expectations. God, I pray that you just teach us to start to love ourselves as you can see ourselves as you see us, your children. And then we take that power and that love and we start to be able to give it to others so that they can start the journey of down this path of accepting your grace, loving themselves, and giving it to the next person. God, we love you. We praise you. Take care of our mission team. Amen.